Yo, it's your boy Locos. And just like Bret Weinstein, I'm also concerned about the migrant crisis. And it's not because of racism, xenophobia, or any other ism they try to put out on social media or in the news. I'm a son of an immigrant. My father immigrated to this country and got citizenship through the military. So I have no issue with people who are immigrating here as long as you're willing to assimilate with our culture, not cause any issues, and just, live a normal, happy, non-crime filled life like everybody else. At the end of the day, I think most people want the same things: peace, good health, contentment, whether it be financially or anything else they have going on in their lives. Excuse me. But when you have a migrant crisis, you're not documenting or taking care of the people that's coming across the border, or you can't possibly sustain them because of the amount of people that's coming through, or your country's own problems, or you really helping. If you ask me, you're only making the rest more and more weak and economically fragile. And if it all collapses, then where everybody's going to go? You have the people in the rest suffering, maybe falling apart, collapse, civil war, whatever, or revolution. And then you're going to have people that's immigrating to this country, strung out, left nowhere to go, dealing with the backlash or the aftermath of economic collapse. And I think we all know that's a very bad thing. And as bad as the pandemic was, and we still not recovered from it, I can't imagine something on the level of the Great Depression. Excuse me. I can't imagine something on the level of the Great Depression happening right now, how that would affect the world. We already have two wars going on, not to mention civil wars and other smaller conflicts across the world. We really can't take any more crazy shit happening. So this migrant crisis, and it's not just happening in America. I'm speaking about most of this stuff as an American, but I'm aware it's going on in France for like at least a decade or so now. I remember hearing Alex Jones talk about that. Same thing in England, same thing in Ireland, France, all these different Western countries. It has no issue or no problem with immigrants themselves. It's the way we're going about doing it. You can't just try to save everybody. You're gonna destroy yourself eventually, and that's the issue, and that's my concern. Let's get into it.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
You're already seeing a lot of people in the black community that have turned towards Trump because they're seeing what's going on with this immigration and how it's affecting them, and the fact that these people that are coming in that are illegal immigrants are getting so much aid that they're not
Exactly.
getting.
Exactly. Sorry that I'm cutting in. I'm cutting in already. But I just did a video talking about the Chicago mayor saying he has a new plan for the immigration crisis. And of course, the citizens of Chicago are upset about it because you have poverty, you have crime, you have all these issues, but then you want to bring in more people that needs aid and assistance. Come on, and you was asking for volunteers to watch over your own city's teenagers over the summer. Who are you to help anybody? Who are you to ask for more people to come in that's not going to be productive workers, productive workers immediately?
And they're like, this is fucking crazy. This is our community, and you're having these people come in, you're giving them food and money and shelter, and you won't do it for us, and we've been here forever, and we're Americans. This is crazy. And then there's a lot of people that, like even Michael Rappaport, because of the way things are going in the world, is saying that, and he fucking hates Trump, and he talks wild shit about Trump. Even he's saying that first of all, that's not off the table, and that now that's the only solution.
Well, I don't think we're there yet, but I don't think on the basis of the time he would have, his temperament, or his ability to build a team. Trump is kind of a one-man show, and his team building ability, I don't think, is enough to solve the problem either. But the punchline of that is, if Kennedy can't do it for whatever reason, if politics gets in the way, we still have to get whatever that cabal is out of power immediately. This could not be
Exactly.
more of an emergency. We've seen through COVID how dangerous these people are, how little they care about our well-being.
Thank you.
And
Exactly.
we have to rally around whatever it is that addresses this problem. And, um, you know, as much as I'm not a believer that Trump on his own can do the job, I would far prefer him to another standard bearer of that cabal.
Exactly. If you're ever wondering, I think it's pretty obvious at this point, but if you're ever wondering why they let Joe Biden run for president and then get the presidency, it's because you're easy to control. And of course, you're easy to control if your mind is all messed up. Like if you can't remember things, if you have issues, going upstairs. Well, going upstairs doesn't mean you have a cognitive issue all the time. But when it's Joe Biden and all the other stuff he does, it just adds to the list. Fumbling over himself, forgetting his lines. It's obvious that he's not well mentally. We could say we want about the nuclear codes and all this other stuff, or even just, basic presidential stuff, non-crisis stuff. He could handle that stuff, or at least try to make it better before it gets to this point. And it sounded like Bret Weinstein said we're not at the point yet where we need to say, yeah, we gotta get Trump. But I don't understand the point of waiting until it's so bad we have no other options. This is the whole country and the rest of the world that's gonna be affected. We're so connected globally, whether it's economically, militarily, there's gonna be a backlash or a ripple effect.
Ball is too dangerous. And I say this, as you know, I'm a lifelong Democrat. All right, this is my party that I'm telling you cannot be trusted with governance.
Exactly.
But that's where we are.
So I got cut in again. That's another thing I believe in too. This goes beyond Trump. This goes beyond Biden. Corruption as a whole within our government, where it's so blatant within pharmaceutical companies or the banks or all this or military industrial complex, anything else that goes beyond just a president. It goes beyond 4 years or 8 years at best, 2 terms. It's a deep rooted issue because you have lifelong politicians that blatantly don't give a shit about us. It was shown during the pandemic. It's been shown before then and after. So anything they really do nowadays doesn't surprise me. It just adds to the list.
The border crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So you went and saw the migration. You saw the groups of people that are making their way up through.
Yeah, I was invited. Actually, my son Zach, and I went to Panama, where I have some history. I did my bat work on Barrow, Colorado Island in Gatun Lake, the Panama Canal. So Panama is a place I'm familiar with, but Michael Jan invited us down to go look at the migration in the Darien province of Panama, which is the province bordering Colombia. As you probably know, there's a gap in the Pan American Highway, about 60 miles that were never built. And this highway that otherwise stretches from Prudhoe Bay, Alaska to the southern tip of South America. And what's there is a tremendously significant and very difficult jungle in the Darien Gap. So there's a national park there. And ordinarily, people do not cross the Darien Gap. It is a famously difficult obstacle. And what we see there is that the international community is encouraging a massive migration of people from South America into Central America, and that almost all of those people are ending up crossing our southern border and entering the U.S. The ones who are questioned are claiming political asylum, which is not accurate. So we talked to many, many migrants, and the universal story amongst the migrants who would talk to us is that they were fleeing bad economic conditions in the direction of what looks like greater opportunity. They've been told by the international community that they should come across the Darien Gap, where many of them are not surviving the trek. It's extremely dangerous. And they're migrating north. Now, the really troubling thing, though, is that migration is familiar in one way. It looks a little bit like the migrations of Central Americans that migrated north when we were kids. But there is another migration. There is a migration of Chinese immigrants that looks different, feels different, and is being housed in a totally separate way in Darien for reasons that are not in any way obvious. Now, I don't know exactly what to make of that. I have hypotheses. There are no more than that. But the Chinese migration is not forthcoming about why it is migrating. It is composed mostly of young military-aged men. There are some women present,
But those women could be covered. That's the thing that does concern me too about the border. I've heard this type of thing being said for years, and it just makes sense. Whether people say whether it's jihadists, terrorists from the Middle East or people from China using our borders, especially the southern border, because we don't have a close relationship with Mexico or South America like we do with Canada, at least in previous years. Plus, it's just a lot harder to get to. But all these different people coming through the border undocumented, unchecked, not going through the background, not checking their health, it leaves us vulnerable for a type of invasion where people are already living amongst us. And we have such a good, open society where people mix from different backgrounds. You wouldn't know until it kicks off. Just because somebody Chinese doesn't mean they're part of the people that migrated from South America to embed themselves amongst our country to attack us once China gives the go. You just can't know that. You don't want to live in a society where you have to. People in internment camps, like in World War II, yeah, in World War II, just because they're Japanese or Chinese or Islamic or from the Middle East or anything else like that. That's not how America works. It's not how it should work. And if we're just gonna be honest, that's the cost of freedom. Like, of course, we need to control the migrant crisis, but at the same time, when we allow everybody to be free and think and do what they want, you know, have to look the same or think the same, that's a beautiful thing. But also at the same time, it leaves you weak to people that don't have the best interests at heart of the country, and they can use that to their advantage. But I don't know what I think it was Thomas Jefferson. He had a quote that said, "If you trade your freedom for safety, you don't deserve either." So, and I support that quote. So I'm willing to take the risk. Another good reason why we have guns. People always talk about the government this, government that. I don't care who it is, the government, foreign or domestic. I want to defend myself. Even if that never happens, criminals, I want to defend myself against.
It's not 50-50 by far. And the international community has arranged separate encampments. The Chinese are in many cases traveling a separate way across the Darien Gap. They're skipping some of the worst parts of it, traveling by boat. And as I think I mentioned, they are, when asked where they're from, where they're going, why they're going, they are uninterested in talking. There's a hostility to it that I found shocking. Because for one thing, if you imagined folks from almost anywhere in the world were heading to the U.S. because they didn't like the way things were in China, they feared their government, they thought that there was economic opportunity, they would be curious about Americans. These are soon to be their countrymen. They would tend to be interested in talking. And even if they, for some reason, because they had lived under a totalitarian regime, felt that they couldn't talk, they wouldn't be broadcasting hostility. They would be ambivalent or something. And that is not the impression that they leave when interacting with them. So I found that utterly alarming. And I came to wonder if the migration of people coming up from South America, many of whom, by the way, are not South American. There are people coming from the Middle East. We met Afghans. There are people from Iran, Yemen, all over the world. They land in Ecuador, which has no visa requirement, and then they migrate through Colombia into Central America and straight up to the U.S. But in any case, that massive migration seems to provide a cloak for this other migration from China, which is nothing if not mysterious.
Why are they letting it happen? Why do you think the government is allowing the border to be so porous? And why are they resisting when Texas tries to do something about it?
Oh no, I hear a lot of people say it's because they want new voters, undocumented voters, voters that aren't, actual citizens. I don't know if that's true, of course. I don't know the actual game plan. But outside of that, I really can't think of a way it makes sense. It seems like these people think they're separate from the rest of us because they are in like many different ways in terms of economics, the lifestyle. But if stuff falls apart for us, the middle class, the lower class, everybody else like that, the society is not going to stand up. You need everybody at all levels to do their job, whether they like it or not, or if they want to move up or not. We still need people to maintain certain jobs, certain industries, whether it's growing food, transporting food, putting out on shelves, people buying it, sustaining businesses. All this stuff helps each other out. Unless you want to just have a society of poor denizens and you have like an oligarchy ruling over them. But this is America. I really don't expect them to actually, well, that's so stupid. It could. But I don't expect them to actually think people are just gonna take that line down. Especially after the pandemic, people was already not trusting other government. That pushed it over the edge, and people were done with the mask and the shots and all that stuff pretty quickly. So if they try something like that, I just don't see it going as clean and easy as they may expect.
Well, I always worry when we're trying to understand what's happening and the information is not being shared with us. You have to ask yourself the question of how many separate things are in play, right? Before I went to Panama, I thought there was a migration of people. Now I think there are two. One of them's clearly a migration, and the other one could well be an invasion. So if I know that there are two things, then I can put them in two categories, and I can ask myself the question, why is this being allowed and why is that being allowed? The consensus, maybe consensus is too strong, but the belief amongst many who have been on the story of the migration for years now is that this is a ploy to create voters, Democratic voters. And I don't think that's impossible. I think that's probably playing a role. I don't know how realistic it is. I don't know whether or not it is clear that migrants necessarily carry the likelihood of voting blue that the blue team imagines. But anyway, I think that that's a plausible explanation in part, but I don't think it really covers it. There are other hypotheses that are darker. There is talk about the possibility of trading citizenship for military service. I think that's a very frightening prospect, but I didn't invent the idea. It has been discussed, and the problem is that to the extent that we saw things like the vaccine mandate drive out the skeptics from the military, this process would also bring in a lot of people into military service who would have more reason to follow immoral orders than a citizen soldier who had been American their whole life. In other words, if the power structure is granting you citizenship, which you want, in exchange for your obedience, then what is it that would cause you to say no? So if you wanted a force that was capable of acting on behalf of tyranny against Americans, then a force that doesn't have a deep history with the rights of being an American, that doesn't have a long-standing allegiance to people within the country, that force would be potentially more compliant, and that worries me.
That should work.
That worries me too because I don't care about your religion. I don't care where you come from, your skin color, your gender, anything like that. As long as you agree with American values in terms of freedom, being left alone, as long as you don't mess with anybody, trying to take people guns away, and all that thing is that, the good parts of America, we're fine. You can become a citizen and there's no issue there. But if you can't, assimilate and you're trying to do things your own way in terms of trying to change how people think, act, and live their lives, and they've been citizens for decades here, but you're just somebody that came here, you think you could dictate the way other people live, then it's a clear issue because, like, you're not from here, but you still think you have the audacity to tell me what I should do or think. It's like inviting somebody over to your house, then they trying to criticize you for every single thing you have in your home. But you have the couches laid out, the way that your couches look, just every single thing they're nitpicking when it's none of their business, and they could just leave if they don't like it.
For you, really didn't consider that until you just said that. But my thought about this idea of the military turning on the citizens was always, but the military is citizens. And many of them are deeply patriotic and unlikely to do something like that. But if they did swap out immigrants, and they did do that, holy shit!
This is exactly.
Then you have a real coup.
This is what spooks me, is that in thinking about the various scenarios 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, I would have said, I fear that somebody is going to issue immoral orders to the military, but I'm convinced that the military will divide over them, that there are those who will carry out immoral orders and there are others who won't.
And at the same time, there was a senator, I think, from Massachusetts that introduced a bill to ban what they call paramilitary training, which is just training with firearms, like to get better at them.
Right.
So the idea is you have a right to keep and bear arms, but you can't be good at them because you can't practice.
So if you imagine in my naive state a few years ago, the idea was, well, you have a very well-armed populace. You have a military that's likely to be divided about immoral orders. I don't like the sound of that, but I don't think that it's a slam dunk that the tyrants win, because the part of the military that's not going to follow immoral orders and the citizenry that will fight to defend the republic, that's a pretty powerful force. But then you have vaccine mandates, which force out most of the people who are independent-minded from the military. And then you have the idea that migrants might be granted citizenship in exchange for military service. And
has that been introduced anywhere, or is this just a complete hypothesis?
No, it's not a hypothesis. Actually, maybe Jamie, you could look it up. I don't want to slander anybody, but yes, I believe it has been raised by at least one senator.
Jesus Christ.
Is that the paramilitary thing?
No. The other thing, the thing about granting citizenship to illegal immigrants in exchange for military service.
So, in any case, I did not. It took a lot of thinking about different pieces of the puzzle to begin to wonder about something like this. But having wondered about it, it doesn't disappear from my mind as, oh, that's just simply crazy. Actually, this, given the number of things that don't add up, this begins to explain them in, a reasonably parsimonious way, and it has me worried. But that is not inherently, in fact, it is probably not the same thing as what would explain the concentration of Chinese migrants.
Right.
Right? The Chinese migrants presumably have left China with the knowledge of their government. The bias of that group in favor of males is something we can talk about if you want to, but it has an obvious interpretation.
And not to mention, let's say, because if it's majority of males, only a few women, and maybe a few children, that means most of those men have families left back in China who could probably do some harm to them if they find out they was, going against the government or had some type of, or, who knows with China in a dictatorial race, but it just gets more leverage on top of you to make sure you follow whatever orders or whatever thing they told you to do when you came over to try to get into America. If what Bret Weinstein is saying is true. And that's a pretty sad thing to think about, because I would imagine at least some of those soldiers don't want to fight in the war. They don't want to be away from their families in the jungle, trying to cross thousands of miles to get to America. I hope. Who knows? Like, they're in the military, they chose to do that. I would say, like, they have plenty of people in China. I don't think they need to force anybody to join the military yet. But either way, it's just a messy, sad situation.
And that ought to frighten us as well, right? So at the same...
How many are we talking about? Is there an estimate of how many military-aged Chinese men have gotten into the country?
Now, I'm always hesitant at this point in the conversation because what I saw is what one person looks at through their eyes. So I'm in no position to estimate that. But I believe we are talking about tens of thousands. Certainly, when we're talking about the entire migration, we are talking about millions. And the number that is flowing through Central America, the flow-through rate in a given day is many thousands. So it's hard to know, and I would want somebody who was in a position to look at an estimate, not just a spot check.
So if the tyrannical government is playing some long game of chess These are the pieces they
The
would be
closest I
moving.
could find on a number.
Chinese immigrants who entered the U.S. without authorization. In 2023, it's over 30,000. Look at how low it was in 2021
Yep.
and how high it is in 2023.
What's the source on this?
This is the U.S. Customs and Border Protection.
Oh, my God. And that's probably a low estimate. You know, it's probably like VAERS.
When I was looking up the other thing about the military, I think you have to have a green card first. Before
Oh,
you
and they
can
give them a green card. But
this also was talking about the numbers are down for the Air Force, the Army.
yeah, for everybody. They're actually asking people who retired to come back.
Damn. That's pretty damn scary. Like, just that cherry on top at the end. Especially when you imagine all the stuff that's going on in the Middle East and Ukraine, how that could split off into bigger conflicts. It does leave you a bit worried. And we always talk about civil war in the past, what, 5, 10 years? But we always imagine it's different, like, you know, political sides, the left versus the right, conservatives versus liberals, and all that crazy stuff. But a civil war amongst people that's, you know, invading and clandestine, hiding themselves amongst the population is a whole different animal. That's technically not a civil war, but considering that they live amongst us as citizens, it just gets very funny. And it gets very messy because it's impossible to know who's an enemy, who's a citizen, who's an ally. Because we let everybody from this country come here. For the most part, people are getting along. They're taking advantage of the opportunity that they sought after, and everything is fine. But when you have certain people taking advantage of that, you can't tell the difference. And I don't want to lose our country, our values, the Constitution, our rights, because we're afraid of other countries that don't give a shit about their own citizens. That's how I feel about it. I don't know how this is going to get fixed. I think we should be blaming the Democratic Party also because nobody wants Biden. They made sure to wipe out anybody having a shot against them last year. Not last year. Last election and pretty much this election too. Only people that's still going out is like Kennedy and maybe 2 others. But compared to the amount of people or the particular people we need, it's just not the same. He's right. It's a whole cabal, an oligarchy, and it's been that way for years. No matter if you're a conservative, a Democrat, it's an issue because our country is at stake. And I don't understand the point of fighting amongst ourselves. We might have an enemy from the outside ready to attack us when we're weak. And if you want to think about let's take it to conspiracy, tinfoil hat land. If you want to think about, Illuminati, the New World Order, all that type of stuff, Build Back Better, all this other stuff that I hear talk about a lot through Alex Jones and other places I listen to every now and then. I don't know. Getting the country destabilized economically through the pandemic, getting destabilized politically through, social media, people hating people because of their political beliefs, and then having an invasion ready and taking advantage of the melting pot that is America. It's a good recipe to take down a lion, if you get what I mean. If you're a weaker country, you have to do these type of tactics to take down somebody that's stronger than you. You're not going to do it overnight. If you don't want to lose yourself and half of your citizens trying to do so, or, especially, war and nuclear war, you have to do things like this. You have to infiltrate. You have to make them weaker mentally. Our military is already suffering in addition to the stuff I just said. Maybe it's because of our values, maybe it's because of stuff we talk about on social media with hating America, all this other stuff, especially amongst the young people in my generation. Who knows? But either way, it's not looking good for us. And I say us because for the most part, everybody is an American that, watch my type of content. So for the most part, we need to get ourselves together. And it's going to affect the whole world, even if you're not an American, because we all rely on each other. That's the world we live in now. Whether it's production of goods, trade, military allies, economically, we all rely on each other. If China collapses completely, that will affect us too. That's the world we live in. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. My word, my opinion isn't gospel. It isn't perfect. It ain't facts. Just how I see it. And that can be very limited depending on information, context, or anything else. So let me know what you think. Like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Peace.